Dr. Farrell, we're back, and we want to ask you a bit about another set of your books that have spun off from the SS Brotherhood of the Bell. So first of these, there's the SS Brotherhood of the Bell, and it seems to be, I mean, we think we know that, yes, you know, I mean, it's been published that the Nazis were involved in the occult in some ways.
Right.
And of course, a lot of people would dismiss that as, well, yeah, so what? In the end, they were a military force and a political force, and they had to be dealt with in that way. But you go farther and say that somehow there's a nexus between the technology, or between the occult and esoteric technologies. And of course, we probably all see the History Channel, A&E, where, you know, there are all these esoteric technologies they experimented with. They try to get flying domes off the ground, etc. But most people don't believe they ever succeeded. And of course, it died out with the war, so we'll never know. And if there was any science in that was useful, the Allies would have found it and used it. But you don't leave the argument there. You pick it up from there and make some different, have a different analysis. So can you explain for the layman why I should read this book then?
The Nazi series is long precisely because it's a huge story. Actually, the first book is Reich of the Black Sun. And that book is more or less about two different things altogether. It's about the German atomic bomb and why I think that they may have been much further along than the post-war Allied legend has it. And the reason I started there is because it provides the context in which to look at all of their other exotic technologies and what they were really up to. And so the second part of that book talks about the occult influences and some of the other very strange ideas. And then on into Secrets of the Unified Field, I extrapolate that further by pointing out that the swastika logo, the corporate logo of the Nazi Party, the swastika itself is a very simplified vector diagram of the type of physics involved. Because what is the swastika? It's a rotating system, and if you look at it carefully, it's got two different subsystems within it. It's got a subsystem of rotation, the outer arms, and it's got a subsystem of stress, which are the inner arms, all right? And that's a classic model. It's a very simplified pictogram of the type of physics that I believe that the Nazis were really after, all right? So I spent a lot of time looking at this because if you look at what modern physicists that are experimenting in this area are telling you, they're always telling you the exact same thing that went into the Nazi bell. Let's look at Evgeny Podkletnov, for example, in Russia, Dr. Podkletnov. He discovered that superconductors have a mass loss. In other words, a rotating system at high rotation is experiencing a loss of mass. That's anti-gravity, very simply put. Dr. Hal Puthoff of the Institute for Advanced Studies in Austin, Texas, another famous physicist, has written papers about the loss of mass in two-dimensional superconductive systems that are in high rotation. So in other words, the Germans are experimenting with all of this. There have been attempts by other people to rationalize the bell simply as an isotope separation centrifuge, which is entirely possible. I will grant you that, but I think they're missing data points of the story that need to be looked at and rationalized. And when you do that, I think you're coming up with something very, very different, because Dr. Walter Gerlach, the German scientist that was the head of the Bell Project, he was not an atomic physicist. He was a gravitational physicist. He was a magnetism physicist. And he believed very definitely there was a coupling between gravitation and electromagnetic phenomena. So you wouldn't put a man like this in charge of your atomic project unless you saw that project as a gateway technology leading to other things, which is what I think the Bell really is. So that whole series, the reason there's so many books is because that project doesn't stop at the end of the war. In the Nazi International, I point out there are numerous detailed connections between the Bell Project and what's going on down in Argentina under Juan Perón and his so-called fusion project with Dr. Ronald Richter. You have the same German company involved. You have it making the same equipment. You have Richter experimenting with rotating plasmas under extreme electromagnetic stress, which is exactly the Bell, which is exactly what Gerlach was involved with. And all of this means that the project continued under independent Nazi auspices under the guise of a host country, namely Argentina, after the war. So it's a huge, huge, huge story. It takes literally more than one book to tell. And there may be updates in that series in the future. I don't know. But it fits in there. And the other thing that people need to know is that the story couples, in my opinion, to Roswell. That's why you have the book Roswell and the Reich, and it connects to the Kennedy assassination as well, because there is, in my opinion, there's a Nazi angle to this that's very, very seldom acknowledged by the JFK assassination research community. In fact, the only other person within this alternative community that pinpointed that as an aspect of the assassination to look at was the celebrated radio talk show host Mae Brussel back in the 60s and 70s. So it's a very, very complex story. That's why there's so many books.